Here we go. Welcome, everyone. Let's see here. All right, we're getting people joined. I'm seeing that attendee list go up. Awesome. And welcome, everybody, to our financial literacy conference, our first session. We'll be getting started here in just a second. Just want to make sure we get everybody in here going and get the okay from my tech person. All right. Jason, will you let me know once we're live on Facebook?
Yeah, I'm still not able to see those controls. I'm going to have to look on the... Actually, can you check yours real quick? The three dots at the bottom?
Yes, I can. You want me to hit live on Facebook and see if it works?
Yes, please. If you've got the control, I don't.
Yeah. Let me see if I make you a panelist really quick. I'll make you the host. Can I make you the host, Jason? I'm hoping that should get
There we go. Got it. All right.
Beautiful. And you guys can still all see my screen, right? Perfect. All right, now let me know once it lets you go live. All right. Perfect. It looks like we are live streaming and we're good. So welcome everybody to our Financial Literacy Conference 2022. This is our virtual speaker series. And so I just want to say again, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here as we celebrate Financial Literacy Month. And throughout this month of April, we're going to be bringing you guys experts that are vitally important. I'm going to be sharing you guys some financial education topics. Today's session is financial empowerment during and after incarceration, and it's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'm so excited. But before I introduce our amazing speakers, I do want to take a moment and share a little bit about who we are, thank our sponsors that made this series possible. First off, my name is Alex Jones, and I'm the Education and Training Manager here at Financial Beginnings, Oregon. And here at Financial Beginnings, both at Oregon, Washington, California, and Nebraska, we all exist to provide free, unbiased financial education across our states and beyond. Our programs are designed for all age groups, and each session is facilitated by a trained volunteer. Please visit our website, www.financialbeginnings.org, to learn how you can bring our programs to your community or volunteer with us. Next, what I want to do is thank some of our sponsors here. So number one, I want to thank Bank of America, our presenting sponsor. Thank you so much for being incredible and making this series possible. A huge thank you. And thank you for your belief in financial education. Next, I want to give another huge thank you to Onpoint Community Credit Union, our impact sponsor, and to all the sponsors who have supported this series. Again, we can't thank you enough. This wouldn't be possible without you. Our sponsors are Bank of America, Onpoint Community Credit Union, BECU, the Division of Financial Regulation Department of Consumer and Business Services, PNC Bank, FP Transitions, the Northwest Credit Union Foundation, State Farm, US Bank, Citizens Bank, and FNBO, or the First National Bank of Omaha. Again, thank you all so much for being our sponsors and making this happen. So before we get kicked off and get going here, I do want to give you guys a little plug on some upcoming sessions we do have. So the first one I want to talk about here is Between Your Heart and Mind, Untangling Financial Conversations with Jen Nash. We'd love to have you register for this one and sign up. We do want to remind you that you can win $1,000 for an Oregon College Savings Plan account when you sign up and attend our sessions. For each session you attend, you are entered in to win that contest. We'll make sure that we have the registration link in the chat for you all. And then that one with Jen Nash is Friday, April 8th from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific time. And the next session I want to plug in there for you as well is I Want to Buy a House and Where Should I Start? And what's really cool, this one is presented by Fernando Velez of the Oregon Housing and Community Service. And this one is actually all in Spanish. So if this is something that interests you and you are a Spanish speaker, please join and take a look. All right. So next I want to take the opportunity in the moment to introduce Erin Moore from Onpoint Community Credit Union. And she's going to be introducing our session today. Thank you for being here and take it away, Erin.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the very first session of the 2022 Financial Literacy Conference. And on behalf of Onpoint Community Credit Union, we have been so pleased to support the work of Financial Beginnings for nearly 15 years now. And while we know that our financial contributions have impacted thousands of students and participants, the real meaningful connections have come through the committed volunteer work. And so I'm so pleased you'll get to hear from Amber Kelly as one of our panelists in today's session, which will really be a meaningful conversation. So on behalf of Onpoint, a financial cooperative founded by educators, we thank you for tuning in and for your support of Financial Beginnings, whether as a volunteer, an educator, or a donor. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to our panelists and allow them to introduce themselves. Michael Gibson, will you kick it off for us, please? Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. My name is Michael Gibson. I am a correctional counselor with the Oregon Department of Corrections. The institution that I work at is Two Rivers Correctional Institution. I've been with the Oregon Department of Corrections now for going on 11 years. Before that, I was with the Alaska Department of Corrections. I started my career off as a correctional officer and recently became a correctional counselor. I'm happy to be here and discuss how Financial Beginnings has played a huge role in helping me teach basic budgeting class to our adults in custody. So I look forward to hopefully spreading the word and getting folks more educated on this critical life skill that is needed by everyone. So happy to be here.
Absolutely love it. Thank you, Michael. And Amber, I'll shoot it over to you to introduce yourself, and then Dirk will go to you after Amber.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Amber Kelly. I am about a 10-year volunteer with Financial Beginnings now. I manage Onpoint Community Credit Union in the Oregon City area. I've been volunteering with Financial Beginnings in many capacities, but have been working with women as they transition out of incarceration and back into the workforce for about 5 to 6 years now, and have found a lot of just great things from these women and great resources that we've learned as we've worked through how to help them get back into banking and how to overcome their fears or the obstacles they have through banking. So I'm really excited to be part of the panel today.
Love that. Thank you, Amber. Thank you so much. And Dirk, over to you, my friend.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And my name is Dirk Van Velzen. I direct the Prison Scholar Fund, which is a 501c3, and we help incarcerated students reinvent themselves through education. And we also do transition support when they get released for formerly incarcerated people and their families. During COVID, a lot of that was food distribution. But for the people that are incarcerated, that's post-secondary support. So tuition, textbooks, mentoring and advising. And we also have a new partnership with the coding boot camp with Coding Dojo. So when people get released from prison, they can do this coding boot camp, learn a new skill, and hopefully get a well-paying tech job. And a great example of the value of education was on Friday, one of our prison scholars who we've been supporting since 2009. In Washington State, we had these resentencing hearings under a Blake decision. And so he got resentenced under these juvenile brain issue kind of things. And he got released on Friday, and he had a number of years to go still. And the judges, one of the judges' criteria was, he's a different person now than he was 20 years ago, of course. And of course, he was 3 courses away from his bachelor's degree. So education makes a big difference. And of course, part of education is financial literacy. So happy to dig in there too. Thank you.
Awesome. No, and great news to hear. I love seeing that. I got the little alert that he was got his release. So that's amazing, Dirk. That's awesome. Love hearing about the work you guys do over there.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get this thing started. And kind of how we're going to hope for this to flow is I'm going to have some questions we're going to go through with our panel, ask each person questions, let them kind of elaborate on that. And then, of course, we've got our chat going. So please, as we're going, if you have questions, put them in there, the chat. And myself and Jason, who's behind the scenes helping me out, will get those questions in front of our panelists, and let's kind of talk through this. So I want to start out with my first question here. And, I'm going to start out with you, Counselor Gibson, because I know you do volunteer with us. And so I'm just kind of curious to hear from you a little bit about your experience volunteering so far, and especially with doing the work that you're currently doing.
Again, I appreciate the question. I really am appreciative of Financial Beginnings. This all started, my dream was to start teaching a finance class back when I first started in corrections over 13 years ago. So, obviously it's really hard to get that going, and especially as a correctional officer. But once I became a correctional counselor, I was able to talk to my superiors, and they were all in for getting this going. The magic really happened when one of our adults in custody had connections with Financial Beginnings. So it all kind of just magically happened. Like all of a sudden I get an email saying, hey, check these folks out. They might be on board with this. And so when I got the curriculum, I was blown away because a lot of the verbiage in the budgeting 1 and budgeting 2 workbooks, for example, we use SMART goals as correctional counselors, and the SMART goal acronym, breaking that down. And of course, that's in those booklets. So you really made it easy for me to get this class going. As you all know, any facilitator knows it's really hard to create a curriculum. I was willing to do it, but you guys really gave me all the tools that I needed to get started. And I can't speak, I can't say enough about the experience I've had with you guys. It's been great. So thank you. COVID, obviously COVID's been an issue throughout the country. It's no different here in the state of Oregon with our incarcerated individuals. So COVID basically put the halt on. We had an abundance of COVID cases. So for the safety of our adults in custody and of course our staff and the general public, we had to halt the start of the class. So we just recently started last month, and we are on cohort number 3 that starts Thursday. So it's been great. I had over 100 people sign up for this class. And yes, we are technically 1,700, maybe a little more than that. But, we're still getting the word out. And folks that are leaving this class are talking about all the benefits to their peers out in the institution. So I'm getting more and more communications wanting to sign up for this. Sadly, the class can only be about 8 students because of COVID restrictions. And that's for the safety, again, of the adults incarcerated and of course staff. We take that very seriously here at the Oregon Department of Corrections. So it is a smaller class, but there are benefits to that because smaller class, we can focus on the needs of each student, separately. But it's been great so far. It's funny, the first class, obviously you learn a little bit about how you're going to deliver. And I'm really, as a past facilitator, I used to be a corporate trainer for years. I've been an FTO, which stands for Field Training Officer. So I have a lot of training experience. One of the big things is to get feedback from the folks that you're teaching. And so I'm very open to that. And they gave us some really great feedback, like maybe starting the videos first, then going through the workbook. So little things like that, we're tweaking it along the way, but it's been a great experience so far.
That's awesome. That's what I love to hear, Michael. I'm so glad you guys are underway there with your 3rd session going, getting ready to start. So cool. And I can remember when we first connected and talking about just the idea of being able to make it happen, and now it's live and going. So cool.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Absolutely. All right, well, Amber, I'm going to pass to you on kind of the same question. So your experience kind of volunteering with us, but specifically within this demographic.
Absolutely. So I've been working with a group of women as they transition out of incarceration into some rehab and back into the workforce. And so prior to COVID, I spent about 3 years teaching the same group of women in their house setting. So it was really rewarding because I was sometimes the only person outside of the house that they would see during the week. So I would look forward to meeting them. They would look forward to seeing me. And we were just able to build rapport and talk about a lot of things in the curriculum. So the curriculum was a great starting point, but sometimes the questions could take up a whole session just talking about a question for their specific needs. Because sometimes the women were expressing to me that they've never had a positive influence at the bank, or they've never had a positive banking experience before. And so just knowing how to interact and the terms and what to say. So we did a lot of base building on that. The great thing about the program I work with is that we get to see I got to see the same women week after week after week. I got to see them graduate through programs and to get jobs. I taught for 3 years prior to COVID, and during COVID, There was not a week that went by that I didn't have at least one of them calling or stopping by my office to let me know how they're doing and what's going on in their life. I just had one in yesterday. So I'm able to build connections long-term where when they now have banking challenges, they feel like they have somebody to turn to that's not going to judge, that's not going to be thinking about what they've done in the past. Instead, we're looking at how to help them move forward with the future and what questions to ask. So a lot of the education comes from the literature and financial beginnings, but also just teaching them it's okay to question and what kind of questions to ask. So that's a lot of what I've done through my volunteer work.
Love it. That's so cool to hear, Amber, and I love the point that you made there, just some of the simple things that we don't even think about every day, right? Just like the terminology and what to ask when you walk into a financial institution. I would never even think about that. So it's so hugely important for them to have that and to have that confidence when they go in there. Like you said, if you only had a negative experience your whole life and then all of a sudden now you're just expected to like figure it out and do well, like that's difficult. So it's just cool to hear that. I love that you're sharing that with them, and such a great experience and huge for them. It's valuable of that. And so Dirk, I want to come to you, and I know yours is a little bit different because you have your nonprofit and you do a lot of work. So I just really am curious to hear how you got into the work that you're doing, the kind of the whys behind that, and how that's been for you so far.
Oh, sure. Happy to share. In my case, I was incarcerated from 1999 to 2015 for a series of commercial burglaries. And for the people that might not know what that means, it's just breaking into like businesses and warehouses as opposed to people's houses. So it's a different type of burglary. We all have our histories, and I had a history of making bad decisions. So I ended up in prison. And of course, once you get to prison, you're like, well, this kind of sucks. What am I going to do with myself? I have all this time on my hands. So I figured, hey, I should go to college. And, college had always been kind of a family value, and, it's kind of serious for our family. But I didn't have the maturity to do it. And of course, once I got to prison, I have all this time. So I figured I'd just get the Pell Grant and go to school. But this is around 2000. And if the listeners know, the Pell Grant was taken away from prisoners in 94 during the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act during the war on drugs. So of course, being tough on prisoners is different than being tough on crime. So when the Pell Grant was taken away, a lot of the college prison programs shuttered, and I think it went from 350 down to 8. And of course, I was in one of the prisons that did not have it. So it took a while for me to talk my dad into paying for my education. And I was going to Penn State, taking distance education courses. And it took me about 10 years to get my 4-year degree because it's so hard to do that for prison. But during that journey, I ran into a lot of other people that would also go to school, but they didn't have a dad with a checkbook. I really had that privilege of somebody that believed in me and had the capacity to pay for my education, which is kind of rare for people in prison. So I started the nonprofit to help other people. So to open up that opportunity for people. And that kind of ties into financial literacy, which is really, it's just maybe a structure of ignorance. I remember, even though I was a college student, once I got done with my undergrad, which was it was a Bachelor of Science, but it's kind of liberal arts and organizational leadership, so not a lot of hard finance stuff. But I always wanted to learn finance just because I had this fascination of, well, I'm going to learn how to sell, trade stocks and make $1 million in the stock market. So I was like, well, let's learn how to do that stuff. So MIT at that time had open courseware, and which is you can take the same classes people can at MIT, but of course you're not getting graded. You're not meeting the professor. You're just reading all the lectures and the PDFs and the handouts and all the textbooks they're reading. So I probably read more than MIT students, because I read all the textbooks and I did all the questions at the end, and I'm sure they're just assigned some of them. But of course, I didn't have the richness of actually going to school there or the network. But the point was, the more I learned about finance, it was almost like a little curve. Like when I learned a little bit about finance, I was like, yeah, I'm going to pick stocks and make millions of dollars. But the more I learned over time, the more I realized I know nothing about finance, and there's really no way to game the system. So there's really no way to beat the market. But that's, just a big picture of what is finance. That's kind of the stock market picture of it. But below that is really just what's finance is, revenue and expenses, and how are you managing what you have versus what you need to pay for. And, that I did take a personal finance class along the way, but everything is good. So the more knowledge people have, the better. And of course, I think a lot of people in prison are the unbanked, is it the banks call it? And I think they've always been unbanked. not a lot of people, there's a certain segment of society that don't have bank accounts or access to financial information. So hopefully that's helpful.
Absolutely. Well, and Dirk, you sparked some thought here because you have such a unique perspective because you've kind of been on both ends of the spectrum where you've been the one receiving this kind of education and then now you're helping people to get that. And so I guess I'm curious to hear, when you think about this specific group, what are maybe some of the challenges as to getting financial education in front of people in incarceration and after?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of different ways to look at it. Like, how do you want to deliver the information over the curriculum? If it's a college course type material, they would have to be enrolled in the school, paying tuition, pick the, presumably they're going to pick the class. It would be a financial type of class. Or the other one, if you're a nonprofit like yourself, you could just have a curriculum and get it to them. But then that's a different type of relationship because then, somebody doesn't really have to pay, $1,000 per class tuition, but you would have to have partnerships with the Department of Corrections, and either you hold, meetings on the inside or seminars, or I'm not sure exactly how you guys do it, but I know you have Michael here that, you might have some partnership where you guys come in as a group, or maybe you have some handouts. But then even if you pass out material, I know how complicated and confusing financial information is. So it's really just not a matter of, here's some photocopies, go nuts. You really need someone to sit down, especially if you're talking about things like the time value of money or interest rates. Math gets pretty heavy pretty quick.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think that's a big piece of it. And I didn't even think about that, right? It was getting the information in front of them may be easier than actually how do we teach it to them and get it to where it's understandable. And so I guess then I'm going to pass it over to you, Michael, and kind of get your thoughts on this as well, being that you're right there in the heart of all this and you're, working with these gentlemen all the time. What's kind of been the biggest challenge for you? And then, similar to what Dirk was talking about there, how do we battle that?
So all of these points are valid. The biggest thing that I noticed when I started looking into teaching this class is it's a basic class. And you don't want to discredit the folks that come in that have more knowledge about it than others. So that's why we welcome everyone to this class. There's folks that have a great knowledge of how to save and even, deal with portfolios, buying houses. But we wanted to make it as basic as possible so we could, address everybody. And so it really wasn't a challenge because I wanted to be really open-minded when we taught this class. Basically, just handing out the materials, there's nothing worse, and no disrespect to any facilitator, there's nothing worse than death by PowerPoint. There's nothing worse than just handing out a booklet and saying, be on your way. I mean, that is awful. So I am not that person. I get a lot of interaction with the class. We start off by breaking the ice like we did earlier here, and then we get interaction from the class like, hey, what would you describe a need versus want? And then even if they are not right on point, and we'll just kind of guide them to what is a need versus want. And that lets them feel comfortable when they don't understand something. As a matter of fact, one guy raised his hand and said, I don't understand the gross versus net. And to me, that takes a lot of courage because we've all been in training where we don't know something and we're afraid if we raise our hand, folks are like, either like, why does that guy not know anything? So I make it clear in the very beginning that this class is for everyone. And I also am very transparent. Part of the Oregon Department of Corrections, one of the things, if you haven't noticed or haven't looked up, it's called the Oregon Way. And it's a really big shift with the Department of Corrections as far as just humanizing and normalizing the adults in custody and letting them know that this isn't the end, that rehabilitation, we take that seriously here. So part of the Oregon Way is being more transparent. I mean, when I first started in corrections in Alaska, you didn't even shake anyone's hand and you used your last name. It was very stoic. We have gotten away from that. Of course, we don't want to reveal personal information and things of that nature, but we're a lot more transparent now. So part of that transparency is talking about my own experiences in finance. And so I let them know, hey, you know what? You're not alone. And it's not just incarcerated folks. I feel like as a society, we have failed in some ways to teach financial literacy. This stuff should be taught in schools. I mean, it's long before you get incarcerated. These folks are just, unfortunately, they came to prison, and we have to, I feel that we have to teach everyone, not just incarcerated individuals, but everyone deserves a chance to understand this. It's a life skill that everyone needs. So I'm very transparent, and it lets them let their guard down so they know that, hey, I'm not alone here if I don't understand gross versus net. And that way everybody's on board, and the class participation allows me to gauge if they're getting it or not.
Love that. That's so cool. And I think that transparency piece is huge. And I think anytime, and I would say it's probably across the board for any of our volunteers when they're teaching our classes, is that part's so huge, bringing what you have to the table and sharing your past experiences. Because, why am I going to listen to you if you're not willing to share with me, right? So I just think that part is huge, and I love hearing that.
Can I say one more thing about that? So when they share with the class something they're doing, because when you're incarcerated, there, obviously we have a canteen and there's, the same on the street. Need versus want happens in here. So when they share how they're doing their budget, we take that in and say, there's not one exact way to do it. There's many different ways, but just explaining the concept of how that, you have a gross income versus net, all of those things are important, and hearing from their peers helps them. And yeah, and then, we always do a feedback session at the end. And I always ask, what's one thing you got out of this class? And it's great.
That's huge. And I think that probably hearing that from, peers in the same situation as them, and like, hey, this is what I'm doing, this works for me. I'm sure that goes so far, right? As I think of like any situation, we tend to trust our peers over someone who's talking in front of us, right? So that's awesome to hear. And Amber, I want to pass it to you because I want to ask, because I know you've been volunteering and doing this type of work for a long time. Were there any hurdles or any struggles that you ever had? And, what did you do to overcome those as well?
So I think for me, the first hurdle or struggle that I had was I wanted to understand the women, and I wanted them to know that they weren't being judged as I was walking in. So one of the first things I quickly realized was like showing up in my business suit every week was not going to be the easiest way to connect with them. So I purposely tried to like come in, not casual, I still have to be professional, but we come in a little bit more casual. And the classes, I quickly realized that I was that outsider coming in, and they really wanted to build connections and to connect with somebody from the outside. So sometimes, every week what we would do is we'd spend the first 5 or 10 minutes, I'd get to meet the new people in the house. I'd hear about what people are doing because people are getting jobs, people are getting ready to move on to the next stages in their program. So I would really take an interest, and that's what I missed the most about during COVID. I get to go back next month and start teaching a new group of women. But that's what I missed immediately, was like, I didn't know what was happening to them. And these were people I had invested in because I had seen them for some of them 18 months, every week for 18 months. So really getting down to just that I'm a banker, but I'm still a human. I'm still working through things, like, them teaching me about things while I was teaching them really started to reciprocate. At one point they knew I was a runner and they were going to go run a 5K. And I'm like, if I'm not working, I'm going with you. And I went and ran a 5K with them. And they had pictures up in the house, like, that I went. So just really trying to connect and build those relationships that are going to last beyond the class. One of the things that we did with the curriculum as well is that people are at different learning stages when they come in. And so maybe they're going to sit quietly the first time I went through, because I would do every class, I do credit, budgeting, banking, and investing. And each class would take about 2 or 3 sessions to get through that book. And I would keep a folder with their name on it, so they felt like that was their stuff. And I would hold it and bring it back, and they would write notes and do other stuff in it. But, repassing out those folders every week and being like, here's your stuff, how was your week? Just connecting for that 10 seconds before I started teaching the women really helped. And then because I would keep cycling through, maybe the first time through budgeting, they didn't say a word because they just were too overwhelmed. They didn't know what to ask. But then the next time through, they would know some of that knowledge. So they were helping the new people. And so some of them took some of the classes 3 or 4 times. But they told me they were getting new things out of it each time. And you could see that because they might have been the ones sitting back the first time, but by the third time through, they're helping the new people. So, you know, really letting those people come back through. And I would say, you know, hey, I know you've already been through this class, but what can you add to the people that haven't been through the class before? And so getting everyone to buy in, it really made a very, very welcoming environment, I felt, for the new people and those that already had the knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I think probably important too for other volunteers to think of if you're, you know, facilitating this type of class, that just some of those things like, you know, what you're wearing, things like that may have some impact on building that trust, building that rapport. So I love that call out and that you noticed that and figured that out. And then you're running 5Ks with them. That's amazing. So cool. So we have a couple of questions from the chat, and this first question, I probably will direct it to you, Counselor Gibson, just to see if you know, and if you don't, that's totally fine. But they asked, is there a similar organization like this in the New York City area, inmate-specific financial resource programming? So I'm curious if any of you guys know too, if this is something that's going on. Because if it's not, we'd love to try to help out and make that happen in New York City. But maybe Councilor Gibson, you know, have a friend or something who knows of this happening elsewhere.
So that's a great question. And I'm not aware of any type of organizations that do like what you folks do, but I highly recommend it'd be great if Financial Beginnings can expand, or I believe this should, like I said before, this should all be taught in all 50 states, all institutions. Matter of fact, I will tell you that I met with one of our other assistant superintendents of another institution yesterday. She was here to take a tour, and I mentioned that this class is going on, and she was super excited. So even though this is the forum, I'll let you know that Alex, I gave her your information. She'll probably be reaching out to you, because I want to see every institution here in Oregon and the rest of the country using this. You know, especially Oregon, because I know it's Oregon, but and you guys, I believe, are in different states, but I don't know about New York. But yeah, so I don't know of any place in New York, but it would be awesome to see that happen. I think it's going to help lower recidivism. I think that, you know, we talk about recidivism and that's a buzzword, but you know, when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, life skills, pro-social skills, critical thinking skills, that's all important, but understanding how to do a budget, because when you get out of prison, you know, you have a mark on your back. Unfortunately, a lot of people perceive folks that are incarcerated that get out, that they have this horrible perception that they're just, you know, they're not going to add to society and be a contributor to society. And that is so wrong. I know so many people that have gotten out of prison and are very successful. So why not give them this other tool so they can become even more successful? So, but I'm not aware of that, but I'd be willing to help find one.
Well, that's perfect. So whoever asked that question in the chat, please, if you forward on your information, let us know, because we can try our best to see what we can do to help you guys get it out there. And I can try to connect you with Counselor Gibson and see what we can do to help that happen. And then Amber, we have a question that specifically came to you. Somebody wants to know, do you or the program you volunteer for take on apprentices to learn from you?
So that's a great question. Thank you for that. I have actually had people come shadow me before in the classroom. There's some things we have to go through to get that approved, but I have had people in the past come and watch, either because they were going to be teaching a class already that they were set up for in a similar sort of setting, or people that were just interested in expanding. I know several of the volunteers were right before COVID, so I'm not sure they ever got off the ground when things closed down. But yes, definitely something we could look into if they wanted to give me their contact information.
Awesome. It looks like they put it into the chat, or if that might be somebody else. But either way, we'll get you connected.
Okay,
Let us know, reach out to us, and I can get you connected with Amber. All right. And so now we have a question, actually, and this would be probably to everybody. Dirk, you know, I kind of want to start with you on this one, because this might be something you have some experience around. So they asked, people with mental illness are disproportionately represented throughout the corrections system, and money, of course, is stressful for everybody. How have you seen people's mental health conditions impact their personal finances and their quest to financial well-being, and vice versa on the negative side too?
Yeah, for sure. I can give you a couple of anecdotes, and also including myself. So back in college, after I was doing my college work, back in prison when I was doing my college work, I was a TA in the education department. And sometimes I was doing the ABE, so adult basic education, and the GED prep. And a lot of times we'd have these guys in this classroom because they're mandated to stay in the classroom until they get their GED. So they have this kind of, mental health roadblock, which is like they're refusing to do anything the DOC tells them to do. Of course, they want to go out to the yard, but they refuse to do their GED just because, they're just being, difficult. So I'd have to sit down with them. I was like, look, man, I know you don't want to be here. You've been here for 6 years. I know you can get your GED. And like a lot of times the math would be a hurdle for them. So you just have to kind of break it down to things they would understand, because they create this mental roadblock to not get them past it. So like if they have trouble with fractions, it's like, oh, I can't do fractions. Well, sure you can. You make burritos for the guys in your pod, right? How do you decide who kicks into the burrito? How many people got to kick in soups or meat sticks or beans? And they're like, oh yeah. Or if they're a drug dealer, it's like, don't tell me you don't know how to do fractions. You were selling drugs, right? So you just have to kind of, make math explainable or understandable to where they're coming from. And math is the underpinnings of finance. So like, if you're doing portfolio management, what kind of allocation of stocks and bonds and whatever things you want to have in there. And then how I kind of bring this full circle to me is, I was in prison during the financial meltdown in 07, 08. And, I like to talk big about my MIT Masters in Finance, which I pretty much took. But in my head, and this is kind of like these self-limiting roadblocks, I never believed I could buy a house, because after the economic meltdown, the banks changed their, you need 50% down to buy a house. And so I kind of had that number stuck in my head, like, wow, we went from this Wild West housing market where you could buy a house with like these ninja loans, no income, no job, self-reporting income, this, crazy market, to then the banks got serious. You need 50% down. And when I got out of prison, I had that number in my head, and I wasn't, tracking the market because I was running my nonprofit. So I never really thought I could buy a house, but also because I knew a little bit of finance, I saved some money. I put it in an ETF, which is, exchange traded fund for the people that don't know that. And I would just buy the market, the SPY. So I'm just kind of putting money into the market and just kind of riding the market. So over time, I'm saving up a little bit of money, but I still didn't think I could buy a house because, I'm in the Seattle area. A small house is 500 grand. There's no, 250 grand is a long ways to save. And then my girlfriend and I were renting this place, and we're spending, over $2 grand a month, and our landlord's not a nice guy. So we're like, why are we giving this guy so much money? And she was a smart one. She's like, well, why don't we just buy a house? I was like, we can't buy a house. And then I realized, because we actually looked at it, it's like, you could buy a house with 3 to 5% down. It's like, well, shoot, well, we could do that, because after 5 years, now this is 2020, and I had been saving a little bit of money over time, and now I've got a little bit of money in the bank. It's like, heck, we could do a down payment. And then what do you know? That's a great financial decision. You buy a house, you're building equity. You're not buying the house for the landlord, where you have no equity. And then all of a sudden, by accident, I had a great financial decision. But all of that had to do with making some good small choices. So like all these big things that happen later down the road, they kind of happen from daily small choices. So you just have to make the right daily small choices. And if that first small choice is just understanding finance, how to allocate the burrito you're making, that has to start someplace. So that, math turns into finance. Finance is basically math in action, right?
Absolutely. I love that. No, thank you for sharing. That has to be incredible, right? Have that feeling of all this time you were thinking, no, there's no way I can do this. And then all of a sudden it hits and you're like, wait, I actually can make this work. And, having that, I'm sure that was a huge boost for you.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like, and then that's like, you can say, well, that's the privilege of, all this stuff. But it's like, yeah, but also, it's a privilege of making the right decision in the first place. And we all start small. And like the silver lining on that story was when we bought our house, and we couldn't afford Seattle, so we fled. We fled Seattle. We're about an hour away. But the thing is, the market we bought in really blew up during COVID because a lot of people fled Seattle. So our little place, about an hour away, when we bought it in 2020, remember we put 3% down, And in the finance game, if you put so little down, you have to pay for mortgage insurance. They call it PMI. And so we're paying, $500 or $600 a month for mortgage insurance because we don't have 20% down yet. And of course, we don't have that much money. So 20% is a long ways down the road. And we have to pay this terrible $560 a month or whatever it is. And then during COVID, the mortgage rates really fell. So I think we financed at 6%. And then before we knew it, the loans were going at like 2.5%. So we're like, hey, we talked to the broker, like, let's refinance. And that was beautiful because we didn't get 2.5%, but we got like 2.6%. But the coolest part is by the time we refinanced in early or mid 2021, our property value had appreciated so much that now the property, when it got reappraised, we had our 20% down because the price is just crazy. So we dropped the PMI, we refinanced at a lower rate. Now we're paying less in two different ways. But all that has to do with like understanding finance, of course, and the timing is everything. So we're really lucky in that case.
No, and I think it's so cool to hear that, right? Because just think about from where you've come from, right? Being previously incarcerated, going through these, teaching this, getting it back out and people. And now you've got your own home. You're doing well. It's just so cool to hear, inspiring.
It's funny. One of our prison scholars, she got out in 2019, and she bought a house before I did, and I didn't know that till later because I was like interviewing her about some stuff. And she says, I'm a homeowner. I was like, how did you get to become a homeowner? So she was a little bit more dialed in on what was possible. So that's the power of education, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Okay, cool. So we have another question from the chat here. So one specifically being asked here, and I guess Counselor Gibson, I'd probably go to you on this one since you're working there at one of the prisons. Do participants receive any sort of credit for opting in or to participate in these classes?
That's a great question. Financial Beginnings offers a certificate of completion for this class. So a little backstory with the Department of Corrections, we have different educational classes here. We have different life skill classes here. And, there's all sorts of types of rewards, everything from, getting like a movie night or something like that to an actual credit based on the educational piece. With this class, it was very, 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 I don't want to say minimal, but basic. It was a certificate of completion, a handshake, and more knowledge. And I know that sounds kind of basic, but really the knowledge piece is their reward. And I stress that to them, how important it is when they get this type of education, how important they're going to be able to apply that in real life situations going forward. Just like when they get their GED, we have a GED program here. And when my clients come in, we meet certain folks on a monthly or every 2 months. When they tell me they're working on their GED or getting their GED, I make it a huge deal, huge. It's massive. When I believe that education is the silver bullet to lowering recidivism. I truly believe that. There's other skills and correctional rehabilitation pieces to that puzzle, but education's the biggest. So they do not get like an actual credit, like a college credit or anything like that, but they do get a certificate. And I also invite all of our, anyone that wants to attend, staff member wise, they come in and they're there and they're present, especially other counselors. I let the counselors know if they have someone in class that's going to complete this course, and they come in and give encouragement as well. So, and that I've had feedback from that and they love it. They're like, wow, that was cool that my correctional counselor came in or a correctional officer came in to celebrate this moment. And so we make it a big deal.
I love that. I think that's so cool. And I like too that you said, right, like the knowledge piece alone is a big enough reward. And I know from talking to you when you were setting everything up, I know one of the biggest pieces you mentioned was a lot of times if people in these situations don't get that help or don't learn, the financial side of it, it's really easy to fall back into what they were doing because money is such a big factor in that. So I love that. Again, you're making that a big deal, but just getting in front of them is just so hugely valuable, I would say.
Well, one other part of that is I even though it's the class, it's a 90-minute course for 2 weeks, so 3 hours. I convey to everyone, please send me a communication if you need more assistance, if you have questions. So even though those 3 classes are, done, they can still reach out to me. But I encourage, I make it a big deal because it is a big deal.
Okay. And so Amber, I guess I would go to you on this too. So whenever you've taught these type of classes, what did you do to try to give them, some sort of credit or that, that similar piece to where Michael was saying there, certificates, what sort of stuff did you do?
So for the women that I work with, it's kind of a unique setting because I get to see them week after week after week. And so if they complete the series of classes, then basically Onpoint had allowed them, as long as we had never taken a loss for them, we would let them reopen new accounts. So sometimes that's the biggest hurdle as you're coming out of, these situations of incarceration and other things, that you may have not made great banking choices in the past. And so you might have some hurdles in just getting a bank account open. A lot of times they wouldn't have proper ID or the right mailing addresses. So we were really able, by building that relationship with them, we were able to work through the IDs and the address obstacles that would have been hurdles if they're going to a regular bank. But since they built that rapport, I could either help them get the information to go to another bank, or they could choose to come see me because we were willing to help them to get them started on that next account. Because honestly, for some of them, it could take years and you could have a job and not be able to cash your paycheck because you don't have the right information to move forward. So for the ladies that I was working with, that reward alone is huge because when they walk out of here with a new debit card, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm moving forward. So that for them, and then they'd go back and tell their friends, oh my gosh, I got my account this week. I have a bank account. Would be huge. And that would be motivation for the other women to continue to learn and grow and then have that opportunity. So that's a lot of the reward that we had.
That's really cool. Not only is that cool, it's unique too. And I know in my past experience, past career life, I worked in banking too and did some volunteering with people in very similar situations. And that was always a huge thing is, they a lot of times didn't know how to set up an account, where to go, or, they'd have some past confusion. Maybe someone told them that they had to have a good credit score in order to get a checking account, and we know, as if you work in banking, that's not true. So there's things like that they just didn't have the knowledge in front of them. And so I love that was one of the ways that you guys were getting kind of incentivizing it there. Now they can start over. Now it's so much easier to work your life when you have an account. It's really hard to operate cash only, especially in today's society.
Correct. And a lot of them, the fear was not being able to get an ID, not being able to cash checks. How can we overcome those obstacles just to get them started? And then another huge fear that they had that we worked through was the fear of what their credit looks like. If you think you've done things bad on your credit in the past, a lot of times these women found that it wasn't as bad as they thought. So the fear of what they had on a credit report was worse than the actual credit report. So they were actually able to work with their parole officers and get copies of credit reports if they wanted. And then I would stay late and set aside time to sit with them one-on-one and go through that, because sometimes it was making 2 calls on 2 student loans and we could get everything kind of back on track, or just the relief of not seeing the things that they were worried that were going to be on there. So that was another kind of reward as they worked through the program, that, when they got to a point that they felt like they were capable of wanting to see that and wanting to make some corrections on their credit, we could work with them on getting that going too. So I'm not a credit reporting agency, but I was able to at least navigate through the system and tell them what was going on.
Absolutely. I love it. I love hearing that. I love that the part about them, a lot of times it's not as bad as they were thinking, because, so often people do have that fear, and even people not even in these type of situations have that fear. So
100%. Yes. That's not just unique to them.
Thank you for sharing, Amber. And we have another question that came up actually in our Q&A section. And Councilor Gibson, I want to start this one with you because I think you probably have the best insight here. So they said that the correctional facilities they've spoken with to get a financial education program going where they are all respond that they have their hands full right now with COVID. Any suggestions on how to get a program going in that environment?
So I read that question. That is a great question. It's a real question. It's reality right now. Each department's going to be different. I know the Department of Corrections here in Oregon, we have a strict policy about COVID, depending on the cases that are happening at each institution. We have different levels that we move up to that can be completely restrictive, all the way down to which we haven't seen yet is no masks. We're still required to wear a mask, which is fine. That's important. We don't want to continue the spread of COVID. So those are challenging. I actually put in a backup plan, a plan B, to just in case we were gonna never go back down to a tier. We call it tiers, to a tier where we could successfully teach classes. It's not the best plan, but I was going to do distance learning within the institution, where I would create a video and they would watch it on their units, the housing units. So I would just say, get creative, make sure that you follow your policy and procedure to the T, and then when you are able to conduct classes, do so and get them done as quickly as possible. I mean, I'm getting these done as fast as possible, and I'm not sacrificing quality by any means, but you know, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I don't know when. I hope not, but I really, it's a hard question to answer because each institution's different, each state's different. But just try to figure out different ways to get this information out to folks. Obviously, the best way is in person, but if you have a method that you can do videos and things of that nature and get the materials out to them, I suggest that.
And Dirk, I pass it to you as well on that. You know, any insight on your end on how to get these classes in front of people if they're having struggles getting that or making that happen?
Yeah, it really comes down to, you know, probably a partnership with the institution. You know, you can just mail stuff in, but, you know, how are you going to find the people that, you know, are interested in it? And even the people that aren't explicitly interested, if the course is available in some kind of day room or education department room, then, you know, you might have some looky-loos, you know, like, hey, what are those guys doing over there? They might stick their nose in the door. And these are the people that might not think finance is really their thing. You know, it's like, oh, that's something, you know, the other people do. But it's like everyone needs to understand finance. And then once you understand just the nuts and bolts of, you know, revenue and expenses and, you know, gross and net and all that good stuff, you're like, oh, this really applies to everyone's life. So, you know, the question is, how do you get that accessibility for everyone? You really need to be in there. And, you know, you got to go work with the prison, maybe the education department. A lot of times community colleges are in there, but then you kind of have, you know, they have their own little fiefdoms. So you might, you know, they might not want to share their turf for a bunch of volunteers coming in talking about financial literacy when their deal is doing their contract work. But you know, everything in life happens because of relationships. So you just build the relationships. Maybe get a sympathetic, you know, warden or education department person and slide on in there and teach some courses. And of course, you know, in person is really the way to do it. Then you can answer all the questions that people might stumble with.
Absolutely. So hopefully that some of those outreach tips give you some help there. It sounds like reaching out to the wardens, reaching out to the prisons themselves and seeing who you can get a hold of, maybe LinkedIn. I don't know if they're on there, but try to get in there and work with us as well. Reach out to us here at Financial Beginnings. Get any help that we can offer getting those in front of people. We would love to. So we just have a few more minutes here. I got time is flying really fast. So before we get to the full wrap up, there was one question I wanted to ask all three of you, just because I think it pertains. And as we're thinking about volunteering and getting this in front of the people who really need it, my number one question for you guys is, if there was just one thing you hoped that anybody in the audience today would get from today's session, what would that be? And Amber, I'll start with you. And if you need a second to think through it, please feel free to take that, but I would just be curious.
Okay, so the one thing I would like as a volunteer for people to take away from today's session is, if you're scared to try this out, like, ask questions, mentor, shadow, because we're all people, and like just being personable and being a compassionate person. I mean, I have learned as much from the women that I worked with as I think they've learned from me. I mean, the relationships I built have been really rewarding to me as well. And to help them, because sometimes the reason that they're in the situation they're in is one bad decision that just led down a road that's different than my road. And so building those relationships and learning that from these women has been super rewarding. And then being a safe person for them to come to down the road. Sometimes you don't think you really connect with them during the class, But once they've been rehabilitated, they've reached out to me, and those are some of the deepest connections I've made, and I've continued to help them. So I always try to learn every class I'm in, and I always try to learn in every interaction. They've taught me some great things as well. So it was just, asking the right questions and being open to feedback.
So cool. I love that. I think that's huge, right? And I think whenever we're teaching people or having that part, I think we always we learned a little bit from them too. And I think we take that for granted. So I love that was a realization of yours. And I just love hearing that you were able to have such a great experience and get to know these ladies, and the fact that you still have a relationship with them is just so cool. So thank you for sharing, Amber. Let's see. So Dirk, I'm going to jump to you next. Then same question. One thing you hope people would take away.
Yeah, I'll just really echo Amber. It's like if it's through the lens of like what can people do to bring these programs in, we're all people, so you can show up as vulnerable as you are and meet these people where they are. And if you show up with intellectual curiosity, that's a great step, because they'll pick up on your enthusiasm for learning too. And just because people are in prison doesn't mean they're stupid. They just made a bad mistake or they broke the law. So you might be surprised who's in your classroom. I mean, maybe it's the stockbroker who sold some bad stocks, and so you might learn from him, he might learn from you, and it could be a really fun environment. But the point is, don't be afraid of going there. So there's people that are eager to learn, and just like you should be.
Yep, I love that. And I think too, just both of you, your points resonate with me there, right? I think so often people think about people in and out of incarceration and they get these ideas in their head, or right, we see what we see in movies, and of course we know that's not real life. And that's the biggest thing, is just like you mentioned, right, is they're not necessarily worse people than any of us. They just got caught when they made their mistakes. Like I always joke around, I have a really good friend who was incarcerated, and when we get all together and hang out, it's like, you're not a bad person. You made a bad decision, and unfortunately you got caught, where a lot of us make bad decisions that don't get caught. That's the one difference. And like you said, they're people too, humans, and they want to succeed. And so I love hearing that.
It's funny, actually, I want to jump on that. The White House a couple decades ago, they surveyed a bunch of Americans, and it turns out 91% of Americans have admitted doing something that could have been a felony and got them in prison. So when it comes to employment, employers like, oh, we don't want to hire felons. Well, look, man, 91% of your workforce is basically a felon. They just didn't get caught. So you're just not hiring the ones that got caught.
Exactly right.
At least you know what they did, right?
Absolutely. No, I love it. Such a great point. All right, the Council Gibson, we'll wrap it up with you. What's the one thing you hope everybody takes away?
Well, I agree with Amber and Dirk. They made some really good points on the takeaway. To echo off of that and piggyback off of that, just don't give up on these folks. You said it best, Alex, and so did Dirk and even Amber. Mistakes are made. If there was no mistakes, there'd be erasers on pencils. So there wouldn't be whiteout in the world, the little strips of whiteout. Give these folks a chance. I would love to eventually see the workforce be more acceptable with folks that have had prior convictions and things of that nature. But yeah, everyone is thirsting for this knowledge that I've taught so far. So don't underestimate them. They're not any different than us. They just made a mistake, and we want to support them because, like we always say, they're going to be our neighbors. So let's support these folks and get them on the right path so they can be successful in society.
I love that. I think that's kind of the perfect little neat tie, bow tie on there. That's perfect. I couldn't agree more. And so I just want to say again, thank you to all of our panelists. So Amber, Dirk, Michael, thank you for joining and sharing this knowledge and what you guys do with us. Honestly, it's amazing. Thank you to everybody who joined and listened in today. Thank you for all of your questions. And if you are, I'm hoping you are looking to volunteer with us, please check out our website, financialbeginnings.org, and we'll get you going. And if you want this taught somewhere that you know, let us know as well. We'll help you make that happen. But otherwise, thank you all, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.